Yes, I have things. Ah, now I can hear. I can hear myself. No, never mind. Well, thank you for your warm welcome. Thank you for your kind words. Can you? Now, he did warn me that you're a people of choice. So I'm going to give you two choices. The sermon in either this envelope or this envelope is A or B. What would you like to hear? A, the small one. Those in favour of A, hands up. B. It's a democracy. Who's in favour of B? Oh, the B's have it. Okay, so I'll post A then. You can have that next week. Actually, we're going to get the same no matter what. So, sorry about that. But I just wanted to see if you were awake and you almost passed the test. But anyway, we're going to look at persecution and poverty. So we can have the first slide. Faithful no matter what. No matter what, whether it's persecution or poverty, to remain faithful throughout those tests. And that can be quite difficult. And we're going to look at Revelation. Now, a lot of people think that the book of Revelation is very interesting, very mysterious. The Da Vinci Code is hidden in there somewhere. There's a pattern, there's a sequence, there's prophecy, there's all sorts of funny things going. If only we could crack the code, we would be so wise. We would know God's mind and we'd be empowered to just overthrow the world or whatever. You know, these secrets are so important. That's one interpretation of Revelation. But it's not what you're going to hear this morning. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's going to be very matter of fact. It's going to actually apply to the here and now, to actually you and me. Because persecution and poverty affected this church over 2,000 years ago, but it affects us now, doesn't it? Very much issues that we can look at. So let's look at the start of this. It says, I know your affliction and your poverty. So, I know your poverty, you're poor. Even though you are rich. Oh, okay. How many people have done that? Anybody else burnt money? I said that as if I'd done it myself, haven't I? No, I have never burnt money, I don't think. Have I, Penny? No, I'm quite mean, actually, shall I say, I think. Oh, this would be terrible. And smoking cigars. Hang on a second. Hold it there. So what does it mean to be poor and rich? Well, this is a contradiction, isn't it? This can't be right. This is typical of Revelation. It says one thing and then it says another. You don't know where you're coming or going, do you? It's all sort of a bit weird. Or is it? It is if we just think of poverty and rich as terms of money, which I've just shown you two slides of poor and rich in money terms. But to be poor or rich can mean something else entirely different, can't it? Not just the physical, material things of the world, which our minds straight away go to. But it can also mean the more important things. We could be rich in love, in giving, in generosity, in optimism, in outlook. We can be poor in those too. We can be mean and miserable, upset, selfish. One of my sort of heroes is Charles Dickens. He writes some very good books. And one of them he wrote was Christmas Carol, and it's a lovely story. And I think he's tried to demonstrate these two characters for us. Here we have Scrooge. Anybody know Christmas Carol? Anybody not know Christmas Carol? Let's put it that way, surely. Everybody, oh, a man at the back doesn't know Christmas Carol. You should have been at the pantomime 2 years ago. I would have scared you because I was a ghost. Anyway, Christmas Carol is all about this character, Scrooge. Now, he is rich. He counts his money every night and he piles up the coins. Oh, lovely. Especially if the coins have the coin has grown in its size a little bit that day. He's a happy man. Well, he's not. Look at his face. He's not happy. He is rich, but he is not happy. He is poor in the things that aren't material. He doesn't have a generous bone in him. He isn't kind. He isn't happy. He isn't at peace. But he's got plenty of money. And in contrast, we have his employee, poor old Bob Cratchit. He is poor. He is so poor because he works for Scrooge. Scrooge allows him to have one piece of coal on the fire a day. And this is set in Christmas time in England where there's snow on the ground. One piece of coal on the fire, and that's got to keep you warm. When it's gone, it's gone. If he's late, his money is deducted. He's already paid a pittance. Never mind about minimum wage. He's paid next to nothing. And if he's late, Scrooge delights in taking money off him. So he's very poor. He's not only poor financially, he's poor in health. And he's in the worst way of being poor in health. His son, one of his children, Tiny Tim here, is very, very ill. Has a crutch to walk. He's so ill. And a lot of his illness is due to poverty. He just hasn't got enough to eat to make him well. But look at this face. What a contrast. Smiling. So how can he be happy? Because he is rich. He is rich in love for his family. They sit around the Christmas table, the big family, with a tiny little bit of meat, but they are grateful. They are happy. They have each other. There is love in abundance. And there is peace. He is at peace with himself. He knows he's doing the best he can. Making the most of it. Cup half full. So we have these two characters in this story. And they're very much like what has just been written about Smyrna. They are rich and they are poor. Now, when Jesus wrote this to the town of Smyrna, when he said that, I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you're rich, was he saying to them that your richness is in wealth, yet you are poor in what you do? You're not kind to each other? You've not got any spiritual content? That would be a rebuke, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be very nice. Would you like that said of you? You've got plenty of money, but you don't give it away. You're not generous. No, that would be a rebuke. And if you look at the letters that these pattern form in the 7 letters to the 7 churches, they always start with the words of encouragement. And then you'll notice there's a line that says, but I have this against you. You may have heard it last week. And if you go through the other letters, you'll find they've all got it apart from this one, actually. I have this against you. And then Jesus says, yes, you've done well here, but actually you could do better here. A bit like one school report. Did anyone get one of those, Could do better. I always gives of his best. No, not really, but there you go. Those sort of things. It's a bit like a school report. But the praise comes first, and then the sort of, hang on a minute, don't get carried away. You could do better in these areas. But this is at the beginning. So I think this is praise. I think this is God saying, I know your affliction and your poverty. Yes, you are genuinely poor. You haven't got any money. But what you have, you're generous with. You are rich. You gather together. You share your bread. You share the hardships among you. You look after each other. You are a caring church. You are full of the spirits, the gifts. And as you can see, once this happens, even Scrooge, once he realises that there's more to life than material richness, he gets a smile on his face because he's discovered love. And he gets the reflection back from Tiny Tim there, somebody he can save because he can use his money to make sure this child is no longer poor and starving. So what are these gifts that we're talking about? Next slide, please. Well, Paul points them out in several places, but in 1 Corinthians 12, he talks about the gifts of the Spirit. Wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, miracles, prophecy, discernment, tongues. And then in verse 14, the 3 greatest gifts: faith, hope, and love. So God is saying to this town, yes, you may be poor, and I see your affliction. I know you're poor. I am with you in that poverty. But I am so pleased that you are so rich. Rich in these gifts of the Spirit. These are words of encouragement. And I want us to sort of reflect, what do we feel we are? What do you think society is today? What do you think the world is? What do you think New Zealand is? What do you think this church is? What do you think you are? Do you think you are rich with lots of four-wheel drive cars, mobile phones, PCs, etc.? Or are there people in our own society here who are finding it difficult to actually afford a loaf of bread? That have to send their kids to school to get a breakfast given to them because they can't afford to feed them. Do those people exist here? Is this a society that is rich with all those gifts? Are our leaders full of wisdom and knowledge? Are we filled with wisdom and knowledge? Is faith abounding? Do we see miracles every day? Is there discernment? Do you see love, faith and hope everywhere? Or is it something that's perhaps a little bit missing? Is it missing in our society? Is it missing in our churches? Is it missing in your life? Far from being a code that we need to crack about a future prophecy, Revelation is about here and now. God is interested in you, us. His words speak to us today, personally. So what about persecution? Well, again, we can get a little bit distracted. There's a little bit in here, it says about 10 days, doesn't it? It says, you will be persecuted. I know you're going to be persecuted, but be wary, you know, it'll only be 10 days. And you can sort of think, 10, what does that mean then? Is there another code here? We know that the 7 churches mean 7 because 7 is the perfect number. Is 10 another figure that means something else? Well, I don't want us to get distracted like that. I want us to just sort of put it to one side and think, well, actually, it's most probably just a standard sentence in the day. Just like if you were pulled over for speeding, you would get a fine for $60 or $80 or whatever. You wouldn't be thrown in jail for 30 years. You know what the penalty would be for that particular offence. And I think in this time, they would know that a 10-day sentence would be a sort of a rap on the knuckles. You know, you've just behave yourself. It's going to be quite a minor offence, but we're still going to put you away for a little while. So it's sort of a fixed term, minimum sentence maybe. They had quite a choice of sentences. They could have had flogging, crucifixion, you know, and all sorts of things. But 10 days, I suppose, in those days was quite minor. But I don't want that to distract from how that sentence ends. It ends with, be faithful until death. Be faithful until death. And when I read that, my mind went straight away to martyrs. They're faithful unto death. Martyr, though, when we talk about martyrdom nowadays, it's got a little bit of a bad press, if you like, an undertone that we don't quite like. We get the idea of someone who throws themselves into martyrdom. Make me a martyr! Come on, bring it on. That sort of person, you know, goes out of their way to seek some sort of persecution or some sort of death. But I want to just relate to you about a certain person called Polycarp. Yes, thank you. And he is one of the first Christian martyrs documented. Outside, of course, Stephen, who's in the Bible, but outside the Bible is an independent documentation of one of the first Christian martyrs. And he was martyred in the year 155 AD. And we have a very detailed, independent account of what happened. He was faithful unto death. He was born in AD 69, lived to the age of 86, and he eventually became bishop of none other than Smyrna, the very town of which we're talking about, the very town that this letter is addressed to. Not only that, he is thought to have been a disciple of John. And he forms a rather interesting link between the disciples that knew Jesus and the generation that didn't. He's one of the first founding fathers. He was discipled under Ignatius, and he discipled Irenaeus of Lyon. So he's up there with some big names of the founding fathers of the church. He's recorded as his character, little educated, unpretentious, humble, and direct. Interesting man. I like him already. He was involved in one of the first schisms, the first discussions, the first sort of fallouts that the church had among many. Between the East and the West. The church had been already starting to divide between East and West, between the two popes or leaders. And one of the debating points was Easter, because the Eastern church wanted to celebrate, and they did celebrate Easter on the 14th day of Nisan, which is the same day as the Passover, because that's when it happened. But the Western church wanted to celebrate Easter on the Holy Day, on Sunday. So they chose the Sunday following the 14th as Easter. And Polycarp went from Turkey in Smyrna to Rome to meet the rest of the leaders, the bishops, and they discussed what the decision was going to be. Anybody know what the decision was? This is a real Anglican decision. What do you think they came up with? Anybody? No? They decided to disagree. And from that day on, we celebrate Easter in the West slightly differently to the East. So they set a precedent, but they agreed. They agreed to disagree. They didn't fall out. And he's one of those guys. And interestingly enough, while he was in Rome, he was approached by one of the famous heretics of the time and says, "Do you know me?" And he says, "Yes, I know you. You're a son of the devil." That was his directness. He was quite cutting to those that he didn't disagree with. It didn't agree with. He could be quite direct. So we get this idea of this character. Let's come to his martyrdom. Well, the town of Smyrna, they were having sort of I don't know what you call it, a festival, some games, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, rugby hadn't been invented, so they preferred to burn Christians at the stake. Yeah. Well, each to their own, eh? But they were getting sort of more and more bloodthirsty. These sports, these setting animals upon people and burning them and one thing like that was their entertainment. And they were working themselves up in a frenzy, and the crowd started to cry out, "Polycarp, Polycarp!" because they knew he was the bishop. He's the leader of this gang that we want to destroy. So they sent the soldiers out to go and arrest him. Well, he wasn't particularly keen to be burnt, right? He might be the leader, he might be the bishop, but he's not stupid. He hid. He hid 3 times, actually, and they kept trying to find him, but his followers kept moving him to protect him. Eventually, he moved out of the city. And it's there where he had a dream, and he had a vision of God spoke to him and said, "Polycarp, this is your fate. You're going to die for me. Are you willing?" And he said, "Yes, I am, Lord." And he was at peace. He knew his end was coming. He knew what he had to do. While that was going on, a young boy was being tortured in the town until he revealed where Polycarp was. And the soldiers rode out on horseback into the country, burst into his house, and there they find an 86-year-old man on his knees praying. And his friends try to stop the Roman soldiers, but he says, no, wait. These chaps have ridden all the way out here. I'm sure they're hungry and thirsty. Give them something to eat and drink. If you don't mind, could I pray for another hour while you eat and drink? And they said, "Oh, you know, Roman soldiers, free meal. Good, no decision really, was it?" So they left him to pray while they ate and drank. But being a good Christian, he didn't pray for 1 hour, he prayed for 2. Never trust a visiting preacher. Well, But anyway, there must have been a little bit of a warning, because they put him on a donkey and they did their job and they led him back to the town to face the Roman proconsul. Now, the Roman proconsul has a lovely name of Statius Quadratus. And he saw this old fella coming to him and he thought, oh, that's not what I was expecting. I'll take pity on him. Look, he said, you just come up here on my chariot, stand there and go, "Hail Caesar," that's all you have to do. Right? Because at this time, the Romans weren't particularly strong at persecuting. There was, depending on who was Caesar, some really violent persecutions of the Christians. But this was a sort of a time when there was a bit of a quiet spell. So as a Roman proconsul, he wasn't that keen in enforcing this. He just said, all you've got to do is say, "Hail Caesar," God, which means, Caesar is my God. And you can go. Easy as that. That's all you have to do. But what does this 86-year-old man do? And we have a direct quote of what he replied to Statius Quadratus. He said, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king and my saviour? Not the answer he was expecting. Hey, he says, now look here. I've got these animals here, wild animals, and they're going to rip you to bits. Right? I don't know what he had, lions, bears, wolves. Let them loose, he says. Let them loose. Not the answer he was expecting. He may be getting a bit cross by now, a bit frustrated. So he said, look, if you don't hail Caesar, we'll burn you at the stake like the others. Mark my words, you will. We have another direct quote from Polycarp. You threaten me with a fire that burns for an hour and then is extinguished. But you know nothing of the fire of the coming judgment of eternal punishment, reserved for the ungodly. And at that point he looked him straight in the eye. And he also looked out at the crowd. By this time, they were enraged and they were crying out, "Death to the atheists! Death to the atheists!" Which means, atheists in those days, the Greek meaning was invisible. They thought worshipping a god you couldn't see, there was no god. For their gods, they had on the mantelpiece or at home in gold or in stone, in nice little shaped idols. They knew they were there. They were real. Not like this God who you can't see, doesn't exist, is invisible. This is where I like Polycarp, his wit. He turns to me and says, "Yes, death to the atheists." And he points to them. And from that day, as far as I know, we now regard atheists as someone who doesn't believe in God. He turned their cry on them. So they took him away. And they went to, at that time, the tradition was to nail you to the cross, to the stake, so as you didn't run away when the fire got hot, I suppose. And he said, "No, please, I'm an 86-year-old man. I'm not going anywhere. I give you my word, I will stay here. I'd rather you didn't nail me to this post." So they just tied him to the post. And they rushed around and get some wood, and the historic records say that the Jews were the fastest runners to get wood because they were so anti the early Christians that they wanted to see this guy burn. And they gathered up all the wood round the stake and they set fire to it. And the crowd watched on, no doubt waiting for the screams of pain. Ha ha ha, this is the moment we wanted. And all they heard was Polycarp praying. And we have a documented record of his prayer, and it's quite a long prayer. And in that prayer, he's praying for those that are persecuting him, calmly, peacefully. There's flames roared around him, and the crowd noticed that he wasn't burning. It says in the documentation, he was baking. I'm not quite sure what that means, but obviously he was getting sort of warm, but he didn't appear to be dying or suffering. So one of the soldiers got up and he stabbed him run his sword through him, and the blood came out of him, and there was so much blood that it put the fire out. And his followers came rushing forward to take his body. But the proconsul Stadius Quadratus said, no, we're not having any of this nonsense that happened a couple of years back with a chap where they put on a cross and then he disappeared. I don't want any of that happening here. Light another fire and put his body on that. And they made a pyre of wood and they put his body on it and they burnt it till there was only bones left. And that was Polycarp's martyrdom. Did you notice a couple of things in that story? When they wanted him, did he rush forward and volunteer? No, he went and hid. 4 times he went and hid. When they wanted to drive nails into his hands, did he say, yes, I want to be like my Christ, I want to die like him? No, he said, I don't want that pain. I don't need that. Really? What happened to the crowd when they watched him? They saw a man praying. They saw a man of God. They saw a man faithful no matter what. And that changed them. Their thirst for blood and death was quenched. Their anger turned to, I don't know what, but they started to walk away. The other Christians that were lined up ready to follow Polycarp to be burnt on the stake were let loose and freed. He did not save his own life, but he certainly saved those others. He was a true martyr in the true sense of the word. Not a volunteer rushing forward for fame, but a man of peace, witnessing to the end. And I say witnessing because the word martyr actually means witness. And I know I've just told you a story of martyrdom, and you sort of think, well, yes, that's persecution, that's the extreme. How does that apply to me? Do we have persecution now? Are you persecuted? Is anybody threatening you with being burnt at the stake? But I think we still have persecution, even today, even 2,000 years afterwards. I don't know about you, but the persecution I feel when I want to talk about God, about Jesus, is embarrassment. Sounds pathetic compared to being burnt at the stake, doesn't it? You're embarrassed. But it's just as meaning to me as it is no doubt to you sometimes. You feel awkward. We have a society that says, do not talk. It's rude to talk about religion and politics. Oh, I don't want to hear your Bible bashing. Just go away. You feel awkward. You've got a friend. Do you want to jeopardize that friendship and talk about Jesus, knowing that they're not interested? Our society is quite subtle at persecuting us now, suppressing our witness, our joy to say out loud, Jesus has saved us. He saved me, he saved you. Whether he wanted to or not. So far from being this story of prophecy and mysticy and numbers and weirdness that we sometimes associate with Revelation, these letters to these 7 churches will all identify things that are real to today as they were then. They're real to a country, to a church, and perhaps they're even real to you and me. Persecution and poverty. But I just want to take you right back to the beginning of this when it says, I know your affliction, your poverty, even though you're rich. I know. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing that we have a God that knows? When I was a boy, I remember hearing this from the vicar saying, God knows, you know, he sees everything. Everything you do, he sees. I don't like the idea of that. I don't know about you. That's a bit creepy, isn't it? Somebody watching over you, like, you know, you're on some sort of camera. I mean, there are moments when one wants to be, you know, private, at least sometimes. But that's not what this means. It means God knows. He is with us. When we're in a state of poverty or affliction, sometimes we feel it's just us. It can drive you to loneliness, to feel, why is this happening to me? Nobody cares. Nobody's listening. I have nobody. But we know that God knows. He knows us. He is with us in our poverty. He is with us in our persecution. He knows us. He knows our very inner being, our thoughts, our motives and our methods. That's a great reassurance, isn't it? It really is. I know. Let's just pray for a moment. God, we thank you that you are a God that knows us, knows our very inners, our thoughts, our will and our ways, our weaknesses, our poverty, our pain. You know these things. You are with us. You alone can give us the strength we need to overcome them, to fight persecution, to endure poverty, to be rich in your gifts of love, faith, hope. We thank you, Lord, that you are a God that is with us and for us. Amen.